Welcome to For the Church, a podcast for the flock of Zion Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Tennessee. We want to help you think biblically about everyday matters. Zion Church exists to join Jesus in his mission to reach people with the gospel and then to equip his people to worship and serve. I'm your host, Keaton Paul, and joining me is my conversation partner and co-host, Seth Scruggs. So this season, we're talking about sacraments. And we've given some definitions for what sacraments are. We've done some biblical theology of seeing how the sacraments, particularly of the Old Testament, what they are, what the Lord's doing with them, and what they ultimately point to. But now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Sacraments in the New Testament. But before we get there, hey Seth, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I don't know how to follow that introduction.
Well, I mean,
no, I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
I am very excited about discussing this with you. This is we're entering like the big one, right? Like or the big section of this season.
That's right.
Where we went from like the things that we all generally agree on.
That's
to,
right.
Like, now we have to discuss the things that maybe people don't really agree on. And I think it's might be important to expound on our context just a little bit because we are just in the sense that we live in Middle Tennessee, which is not, for instance, we both have a lot of friends in Jackson, Mississippi, which is kind of the PCA capital of the world.
Yeah,
and whereas this is the only church of our denomination in our county.
Yep.
So we live in a very different context so this issue of baptism is a little bit more touchy than maybe it would be in other places that have if you're surrounded by 15 PCA churches, then maybe you're not really discussing that.
That's right.
As opposed to where we are, where generally our context, I would say, is Baptist or Baptist leaning, non-denominational kind of things.
That's right. Baptist with cooler signs
and names.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just one like noun or action verb church.
Yep.
As I've heard this person put it. But anyway, yeah. So no, that's a great point. So to those who may or may not be listening to this, we are Presbyterian. We belong to the Presbyterian Church in America, PCA, which is a conservative mainline attempt, we could say, at the PCUSA. So we do still hold to the Westminster standards and the kind of the quote unquote, don't let this be a term that like scares you, the evangelical branch of Presbyterianism today. So there is that. Presbyterians do have a particular view of how the Bible works and what sacraments are and the church. And those are all three things that really play a lot: how the Bible works, the sacraments themselves, and the nature of the church. Those three components actually have a whole lot to do with baptism. So there's that. If you're not familiar with Presbyterianism at large and you would like to know more about those things, then send us an email or leave a comment. But if not, otherwise, there's that. Now, another thing that this is not, okay? So please don't hear this in this way. What we're trying to do here today is make the positive and honestly really vanilla Presbyterian case for covenant, also sometimes called infant or pedo baptism. We're just saying this is what Presbyterians who hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith believe. That's all. Don't hear this as like a in the rightful sense, a poo-poo on, I have a 2-year-old at home and Seth has a 6-month-old.
Almost
Yeah.
6 month old,
Okay. So, that term, like, oh, it's startling. But we're not trying, we know that especially in our context, there are lots of people who have credo Baptist views, and that's great. Happy for you. Like, actually. And we both actually come from credo Baptist traditions. And love a lot of credo Baptist people. And have super high respect for them. So don't hear this as like, boo, credo baptism, lame, because that's not what we think. But we do, because this is for the church, podcast for Zion Presbyterian Church, we want to make a positive case for here's what Presbyterians, particularly Zion, believes about the nature of baptism. And it's okay to disagree. Like, it's fine. One thing you will hear that we do believe in credo baptism. All for it. 2 thumbs up. Like, 5 stars from this reviewer on credo baptism. That's great. Love it. Love it. We just also believe in pedo baptism too, which is probably the part that makes people uneasy, and that's okay. You're welcome here, right? So with that, baptism. It's a sacrament of the New Testament. Here's what the confession says, chapter 28, verse 1. Baptism is a sacrament of the New Testament ordained by Jesus Christ, not only for the solemn admission of the party baptized into the visible church, but also to be unto him a sign and seal of the covenant of grace, of his ingrafting into Christ, of regeneration, of remission of sins, and his giving up unto God, through Jesus Christ to walk in newness of life, which sacrament is by Christ's own appointment to be continued in his church until the end of the age. So, here's what that really was. If you have a sacramental view of baptism, that is, baptism is a mark that God puts on his people, that's a really generic view about baptism. Now, if you don't have a sacramental view of baptism and you prefer ordinance instead of sacrament, in that case, what is baptism? Baptism is so far as I understand, and again, if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. I'd be happy to say, oh, okay, thank you. But so far as I understand, in the ordinance view, it is a public declaration, a public pronouncement of the faith that you now have and obedience in following Jesus and being baptized. So if that's more in your view, then you would disagree with what I just said about the definition that I read from the Westminster Confession of Faith. But if you have a sacramental view, then generally speaking, you're going to look at that and go, yeah, sure, absolutely. Yep. So there's that. So now then, with that note, let's tease apart some of the different views of baptism. First, the Roman Catholic view of baptism. And this is all clearly laid out in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Questions like 1201-ish through several later, they take a good long chunk. It's in that second section, Article 1 on the sacraments. But here it is, like, really compressed. So if you're listening and you're Roman Catholic and you're like, but it's so much more than that. Yes, absolutely. But I'm trying to keep it, like, condensed. So please be gracious to me. Okay. I'm so sorry.
30,000 foot view.
This is the 30,000 foot view. I promise I'm not trying to misrepresent. But what is baptism doing? Baptism is a washing away of original sin and a point, a manner in which the regeneration, in some sense, it is taking place and happening, so that now, because of baptism applied by the priest, the old has been washed away, and now behold, the new. In that moment, boom, right there, bam, has come. So 30,000 foot view. Okay. Please hold your tomatoes, rotten tomatoes. It is regenerative, and it's washing away original sin. It's a lot more than that. Okay. Catholic Catechism has a lot to say about it, but those are like, at least from what I understood, the two main components of what's happening through the pronouncement of the priest. Those two things. Okay.
So
yes.
In the Catholic view, a baby who has been baptized is regenerate.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily something we would say.
That is not
Which is something we'll get to in a minute. But
yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that before we continue. Okay.
So
Lutheran view.
Now the Lutheran view. So the Lutheran view, and I do think that this somewhat depends on who you ask within the Lutheran Church. In their confessional statements of the Lutheran Church, both the Augsburg Confession and in Luther's Catechism, to me at least, and again, if you're listening to this and you're Lutheran and you hear what I'm about to say and you're deeply, deeply offended and feel as though it was a complete misrepresentation, I am very sorry. I did not mean to. But just on my reading of what I saw both in Luther's Larger and Shorter Catechism and in the Augsburg Confession, it sounds very Reformed to me. Like we're saying, generally speaking, hold the rotten tomatoes once more, the same thing. That said, within Lutheran theology, and I think you can see this somewhat if you really want to, in the Lutheran statements, that there is a regenerative aspect of baptism to where you can, at least my understanding of what some Lutheran theologians say about their confessions of faith, that the baby who is baptized is, in some sense, regenerated. Generally speaking, there may be some who read the confessions of the Lutheran standards and say no, not regenerative. It's a different thing, and happy for that. But that's the general consensus that I've from what I've been able to see, and I'm by no means a scholar on Lutheranism. So again, some grace, please. You're Lutheran, right? You're all about grace. Don't be about law. Theological joke. Wink. I got you. Okay. We're all in this together. Okay. So now then, there are those two views. Now then, let's swing. We're going to swing way to the other side. What I'm going to call, again, the generic Baptist view. So again, now this one I'm a little bit more comfortable speaking to because this is how I grew up. But there are people here, I'm going to give this kind of general, I'm painting with a broad brush here, which will always get you in trouble on the internet. But painting with a broad brush nonetheless, there will be people here who are like, I'm Baptist and that's not what I believe. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Painting with a broad brush here. So generic Baptist view on baptism. What is baptism? One, not a sacrament. Sacraments are Catholic, and we're not Catholic, so not that. Okay, it's an ordinance that is public profession of faith coming forward in obedience to Jesus. Now then, you are probably significantly more acquainted with said quote unquote generic Baptist tradition than I am. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. So my background would be Southern Baptist, which is there's definitely, as you said, there's a spectrum within Baptist circles, just in the sense that, so Baptist is almost more defined, like the word Baptist, it is almost more defined by like the method of baptism, the mode, than exactly what you believe about baptism, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
In that, because there are many, many, many different Baptist denominations.
Yeah.
And so you might have certain independent Baptists
Yeah.
or general Baptists or primitive Baptists or Southern Baptists and all these different kinds of things that all like have the same mode of baptism.
Right.
But I know for a fact that there's certain that would say, and I don't know that they would use the word sacrament, but I think that based on our kind of working definition in this series of sacraments, that it would be a sacramental view in that, baptism is required for salvation.
Okay.
So there's some Baptist circles.
Yeah.
And when I say that, we'll get to this in a minute. When I say that they would define themselves more by mode, it's that they're full immersion, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there's certain Baptist circles that would say, well, you have to have baptism by full immersion in order to be saved. There are others that would not say that. And so because of some interesting things with Baptist theology, that one of them being church autonomy, that means that you can have some differing views across that. So generally speaking, yes, I would say Southern Baptist being the largest denomination of that title, the view there is what you're saying, the kind of ordinance profession of faith view, whereas others might have a different view. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And that resonates, I think, with a lot of people who come from that tradition. So there are like those are three views, right? Roman Catholic view, Lutheran view, and generic Baptist view. Now then, the Reformed view. What do the Reformed believe about baptism? Like, what is it? Again, going back to our confession, chapter 28, verse 1, it is a sacrament of the New Testament, and by sacrament we mean a covenant sign and seal, or a sign and seal of the covenant of grace, right? To be a part of this work that God promised he would do all the way back in Genesis 3 and is unfolding in his redemptive plan, rooted in its central location in the person and work of Jesus Christ. So it's a sacrament of the New Testament ordained by Christ, not only for the solemn admission of the party baptized into the visible church, that's an aspect. So there's part of what baptism is doing is it's the sign and seal of the covenant of grace. In one sense, one aspect of it is that the person who is baptized is to be viewed as belonging to the church. Okay, that's huge. That's massive. That's a big deal for the Reformed. And I think for a lot of people, I think, everybody can assent to that. So in some way, but also to be unto him a sign and seal, or her, him or her, a sign and seal of the covenant of grace of his engrafting into Christ. So what baptism is picturing, that the person who is received as baptized is not only a part of a visible congregation, but by way of what the congregation actually is, the visible body of Christ, you're engrafted also into Christ. So it's signing and sealing that engrafting into Christ, union with Christ. It's also, Catholics will smile here. Lutherans will smile here. Baptists will not smile here, I'm sorry. To be a disappointment. It's also a sign and seal of the covenant of grace in that it's engrafting into Christ, but also a sign and seal of the covenant of grace of regeneration and the remission of sins, and is giving up unto God through Jesus Christ to walk in newness of life. All of these things. So what is baptism picturing, and what is it signing and sealing to us? Church membership, our engrafting into Christ, regeneration, and remission of sins. All of these things are going together. And so, there's a lot there that will freak people out. Here's what the Reformed are not saying, where our Roman Catholic and Lutheran friends were smiling whenever I said it's signing and sealing the covenant of grace, both the engrafting into Christ, regeneration, remission of sins, and they all smiled. What we're not saying Sorry to disappoint you now. We're just going to disappoint everybody. Okay. But anyway, what we're not saying is that at the moment that anyone is baptized, that when the water hits them one way or another, that suddenly, boom, in that moment, now they're unified to Christ and regenerate and have all of their sins remitted. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that it is a sign and seal of the covenant of grace, and that this sign and seal of the covenant of grace is a picture of what God does in the covenant of grace. And we'll tease that out more in just a minute. But so we do believe it's a sacrament. We do believe that there's a physical sign and a spiritual reality going hand in hand, that things like regeneration, remission of sins, and grafting into Christ are all aspects of both of those things. But we're not saying necessarily that in that moment, those things are happening because of the water in the pronouncement of the pastor. So that would be a different view. So in that sort of way, it's kind of a middle. Mm-hmm. In a general sort of way. So there is that. Now then, next thing that we need to talk about. We've got our views up there of what different, broadly speaking. I didn't include Eastern Orthodox because I don't really understand it that well, and I don't want to talk about stuff that I don't really understand. So you're welcome to all of our Eastern Orthodox friends. You don't have to be misrepresented by somebody that's generally ignorant of your tradition. So 2 thumbs up to that. But now then, let's talk about baptismal mode. What is the rightful way to be baptized? So there are 3 views or 3 modes of baptism that people who hold to churches that hold to the Apostles' and Nicene Creed do. Okay, first. It is immersion, right? So immersion, it makes sense. You are emerged. I guess that's an I. Immersed. There we go. That's right. Go. Yep.
I got you.
English. You're dunked. You're all of it. Lots of water. You are being put in the water.
Yep.
Okay. That's a big distinction. You're getting put in the water. There are 2 other views though. There's one that's known as effusion. It doesn't take place in a lab. Effusion simply means pouring, right? And so in certain traditions, they'll have like a cauldron pitcher, for lack of a better term, where they're like, it holds water in it and they're pouring it on you. In other ways, they'll take like a fancy little spoon and like pour in that way. And then the final one is sprinkling, which is precisely what it sounds like. You get some water on your fingertips and you flick it in people's faces. You're sprinkled as like aggressively as possible. Not really, but like you just take it and you kind of like dip, 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 dip. So those are the 3 main views. Now then, our dear and beloved Baptist friends are Baptist because they believe that they really like the word Baptist. And baptism, and the Greek baptizo, which means immerse. Am I right? No, actually, that's not.
I don't speak Greek.
I don't speak Greek, so baptizo, the Greek word, can mean and often does mean immerse. That is true, very true. It doesn't always mean immerse, though. So for all of our friends that say, baptizo, it is only rightfully ever translated to immerse. There are oftentimes places where it doesn't actually mean immerse because it really can't, and our translations don't render it that way. Classic case within the text of the New Testament itself is Mark chapter 7. There, Jesus is talking about what actually defiles a person, and he'll talk about you've got all these Pharisees walking around here who they clean the outside of themselves. Metaphorically, they dress themselves up in very pious sorts of way, but inside is, graves, that are washed and glorious, but inside they're a bunch of dead bodies. But it says this, chapter 7, verse 4, Mark. When they come into the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, baptizo, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing, baptizo, of cups, pitchers, and dining couches, places to anachromenai. This is the ESV translates that verb. How does it do it? It's they reclined while eating, but I forget how the ESV does it. But it bothers me. That's my one major critique of the ESV.
You're reading, just for everyone at home, this is the NIV.
This is the NIV. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. It's a premium Bible. It's goatskin. I just got it. I really like it a lot, but I got it for $54. Okay, so give me a break. And I referenced the Greek, so it's fine.
Yep.
You can just move on. But yes. So anyway, there in chapter 4, the NIV translates baptizo, wash, twice. And the reason it says wash instead of immerse, is namely because of the context. When they come in from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. Likely that cleansing ritual, they're like probably the washing that takes place in this one. They're in a fairly arid place, not a whole lot of running water. So to have some sort of bath, which did exist in that world, but were very expensive and more public baths. And then, they just kind of sit there for a while, and it's not great. Probably more of what's in mind is some of the washing or cleansing rituals. And so they would have these large stone vases, and they would wash in that way, but they're not delving into it. They're taking and applying the water to themselves instead of applying themselves to the water. But then they go on to say, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups and pitchers. Some manuscripts, the NIV says kettles. The ESV and other manuscripts will say couches, places of big things. You're supposed to be able to recline on them like kings, with the servants feeding them grapes. Okay, you can't take a couch and throw it in a pool, because then that's no good. You've ruined a couch. I would be very upset in the ancient world if somebody threw my couch in a pool. Then I'd ask, where'd you get a pool? But so it clearly there that the water, the thing is not being stuck in the water's being applied to the thing. So, and this also takes place, this sort of concept of how the water is applied is used in this sort of washing sense of water being applied to the thing instead of the thing being applied to the water throughout the Greek translation of the Old Testament, what's known as the Septuagint. That same sort of baptizo is used for water being applied to a person instead of a person being applied to water. So that's not to say, now then that being said, that particularly the Reformed, at least this Reformed guy, is opposed to immersion. Generally speaking, within the Reformed tradition, immersion is A-okay, buddy. A-okay, bucko. Here is another controversial statement. Straighten up in my chair. Spicy. What is Christian baptism? I heard a church history professor ask this question. What is Christian baptism, or what does Christian baptism entail? What are the elements? It's two things: water and the name of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If it has water and the name of the Trinity, congratulations, that's Christian baptism. So you can see this going back to some of the earliest documents within the Christian tradition. So, for instance, the Didache, Didache. We've talked about this before on certain, I think it was Advent series. We talked about the Didache and the various ways that you can pronounce it. I'm pronouncing it Didache. Some people will go too hard and try to make it sound very Greek. We're just going to call it the Didache. It means the teaching. The longer name is the teaching of the 12 apostles. But in it, it's like a handbook on the Christian life and has some elements about the nature of the church. Baptism and the Lord's Supper are mentioned in there. And when it talks about baptism, it says there's a variety of different ways. If you're at a place that has what the text calls living water, likely cold, flowing water, that's what it means by living water. If you've got some place like that, baptism would be great there. If you're in a place that doesn't have flowing water, it can be in a cow pond, still water, dead water, gross water. It can be in that too. But if you don't have a good pond or a good pool or something like that, then you can pour 3 times in the name of the Trinity. And you can there can be an implication from there of sprinkling will work just fine too. So all that to say, the Didache, this was written probably early 2nd century. Some scholars say maybe even very late 1st century. So there's still people are alive who knew John, and maybe even Paul, right? Like if you were a little kid, you saw Paul when he was in Ephesus or something like that. Like here you are as an older person. We're like, yeah, I heard him preach. It was crazy. So the Didache is written at that point in time, and they're saying what is the proper mode? Honestly, just some water. You just need water. Should we dunk? Cool if you can. If you can't, that's okay. Just sprinkle. That's fine too. You need water and you need the Trinity. Or take, for instance, Calvin. Oh, the Genevan reformer who had a headache for over 20 years. Of course he's gonna be he can't stand the Anabaptists, right? He's gonna be really mean and stodgy. Well, actually, in book 4 of his Institutes of the Christian Religion, when he talks about baptism, what does he say? He says, honestly, there's a lot of testimony to immersion, and if you can immerse, that's awesome. It might not be super prudent to immerse babies in the middle of winter when infant mortality rates are really, really high. But if you want to immerse, immersion's fine. Sprinkling might be a little more pragmatic. But either way, so there you go. What does Calvin say? Mode doesn't really matter. You just need water in the name of the Trinity. Okay, well, the Puritans, surely, because they're, the thought of somebody being happy somewhere about being immersed, it just drives Puritans crazy, doesn't it? Well, not really. While the Westminster Standards are probably have the language that's the most directed against immersion as a mode of baptism, it still, according to many interpreters, will still say immersion is a fine and acceptable mode for baptism. It will say that immersion is not necessary, but that sprinkling and effusion are, you could probably even interpret it as preferred. One of the Westminster divines, his name was Daniel Featley, and he was also one of the chief translators for the King James Version, was a brilliant man, was kind of crusty sometimes, and he wrote a book called The Dipper's Dip, and in that book, he basically, he goes on an utter tirade. It is a tirade as to why he really doesn't like the Anabaptists. Probably goes a little too hard. The other Westminster divines are, at least according to the minutes that we have recorded, many there were like, this might be a little far, Danny boy. Let's tone it down. So anyway, even the Westminster Standards, while they're probably the most quote unquote against, less okay with immersion, even they are like, you can do it. It's okay. It's no big deal. So, all that to say, here's what we have so far. Within the Reformed tradition, is credo baptism okay? In the Reformed tradition, credo Baptist, being baptized as a believer is 2 thumbs up. We're all for it. We love it. Okay. Mode. Can you be sprinkled, effused, or do you have to be dunked? Reformed say you can either one. Doesn't whatever. It's all fine. So all that the Reformed, like, hear this, beloved. The Reformed love, hopefully, are loving our neighbors well, and we're very broad. We in fact have maybe one of the broadest views of what acceptable baptism is. So welcome, come join.
But what about the babies, Keaton?
Oh no! I thought we were going to run out of time if I just kept dragging that on. Okay, all right. Well then, all right. Reformed people baptize babies. Golly, Bill, what's going on?
Wait. Back up for a second,
okay.
Because we have some friends down the street.
Oh yeah,
at Covenant Grace.
Yeah, buddy.
Whom we love dearly.
We love them. They're amazing.
They're Reformed Baptists. So when you say Reformed baptized babies, that's not
okay.
100% true.
That's not 100% true.
Okay.
So to all my Reformed Baptist friends out here, I'm not one of those guys, right? Y'all know these guys on the internet. If you're Reformed Baptist, you probably love some of these guys that say this, that are like, basically, if you're Baptist, there's no way you're Reformed. I don't say that. I say you have a different view of covenant theology and the nature of the church than probably the normative of the Reformed tradition. But hey, I'm happy to have a seat at the table with y'all, and I'll call you Reformed. That's okay. I'm happy with that. I'm not against that. But so anyway,
so you're putting, for what we're about to talk about, infant baptism, paedo baptism, generally speaking, the broad umbrella of Reformed theology would fall in this category.
Yes, okay. That's right. And I'll probably use a term like covenant baptism. But hey, once again, shout out to my Reformed brethren out there and sisterin. Like, their view of baptism is also covenant baptism. It's just a different sort of covenant. Like, their understanding of covenant is different than mine. Right. So, like, once again, wink. I got y'all. All right. Love you guys. You're amazing. Okay. So now then, Reformed covenantal paedo baptism. All right. That's better. We all feel better about that. They say, good job. Thanks, buddy. Again, I see y'all. All right. So, here we go. In the Reformed tradition, there are, well, back up. What you think about baptism will mainly be derived from 3 separate components, all about, Bible and theology. Your view of how the Bible works, your view of the nature of sacraments, and 3, your view of the church. And if you don't have those 3 components, then none of this is about to make sense. So let me give you each of those things independently. 1, starting with the view of the Bible. The Reformed Paedo-Baptist tradition has a particular view of how the Bible works that we call covenant theology. Now then, Reformed Baptists also believe in a kind of covenant theology. It would be different than ours, so I'm describing ours. Within our view of covenant theology, there is a covenant of works that the Lord enters into with Adam in the garden, whereby upon keeping the law of not partaking of the fruit, he and all of his posterity, our standards say, will enter into eternal bliss, the presence of God, etc., etc. He fails. Our catechisms say he and Eve fell, and not only they, but all of their posterity after them are also plunged into sin and death. And so it's there, Genesis 3, particularly verse 15, that the Lord inaugurates a new covenant or a different covenant, a covenant of grace, wherein the Lord promises that he, upon the work that he alone does through the fullness of time and the sending forth of his Son, will undo all that was lost in Adam's fall and restore to himself a people purchased by the blood of Christ through the work of the Spirit by grace through faith unto himself. And this group, because of what Christ has done, not because of what Adam has done, but because of what Christ has done, will be restored as the people of God and will dwell with him in eternal bliss. So that one covenant of grace, starting from Genesis 3 and going onward, takes place in a variety of different, we can call it, our standards call it this, administrations, so it can look differently. The covenant of grace looks different with Adam, or even with Adam, or with Noah, or with Abraham, and it looks different with Moses, and during the time after David and the prophets. But it's filling out the Lord in redemptive history. This is the beauty of especially a Reformed view of special revelation. The Lord is revealing more and more about himself throughout the scope of the Bible. He doesn't, like Genesis 1:1, download everything there is to know about who the Lord is and what the Lord's doing. So he's unfolding, and so that administration of the one covenant of grace looks different. Now then, there's when we turn to the time of Jesus in the New Testament, we're still in the covenant of grace. Jesus comes and fulfills the law and is the second Adam who fulfills all righteousness, who dies as a substitute, imputes to us his righteousness, all of these things, and ascends on high. So where are we now? Well, we're still in the covenant of grace. It's this gracious work of the Lord. But what all that to say, in the Reformed, particularly our version of Paedo Baptist view of covenant theology, that covenant of grace sees more unity or continuity than discontinuity. So there's a path that's moving forward, and it's our hermeneutical, that is our lens for reading the Bible. It's our lens that says we are going to naturally see more continuity between the time before Jesus, what we call the Old Testament, and the time after Jesus, what we call the New Testament. So there's that. That's our view of covenant theology. These next will be much quicker, I promise. Sacraments, see episode 1. See, I told you so. Okay, 3. The nature of the church. Okay. So everything I just said that I took a really long time to say about covenant theology is going to pay dividends here. Since we see continuity, or strive to see continuity instead of discontinuity between the two testaments. In the Old Testament, the time before Jesus, the covenant, who was the church? It was to the children of Abraham, who were brought into this people. They received the covenant sign of circumcision. They were part of this group, this covenant community. But it's explicitly said that who is to be viewed as this? It's both believers, yes, and the children of believers, right? So Abraham believed God was counted to him as righteousness, and the covenant signs given to him because of that. So here is credo circumcision. Abraham is about credo circumcision. But then the Lord says that, yes, the sign is for you, but it's also for your children, because your children are supposed to be viewed as the church. Okay? And that part is not controversial. At least it shouldn't be. I think everybody recognizes that. Now then, when we fast forward to the New Testament, again, in our hermeneutic, how we view the Bible, we say that we're striving to see continuity instead of discontinuity. the church in the New Testament, we say who belong to the church, who's to be viewed as part of this visible body of Christ. Well, we say, just like Abraham, believers, and also just like Abraham, the children of believers. And so those three. So who belongs to the church? Who's to be viewed as part of this group, this physical manifestation of the body of Christ? In our view, it's believers and the children of believers. And so because of that, as part of being a member of the church, this visible body, the covenant community, you are to receive the covenant inaugurating sign of being part of the covenant community. In the Old Testament, that's circumcision. And in the New Testament, that's baptism. Okay. Now then, where many of our friends will differ, and I'm going to be very quick and charitable here because there are plenty of other videos to talk about different views of, the continuity versus discontinuity. Generally speaking, this is not everybody, this is not universal. Okay. People will say there is discontinuity. In the Old Testament, it's the people of God are generally speaking an ethno group. And the promise is that there's a coming seed, ethno, it's from the same line as a seed theology. Well, now Jesus is here, and that seed theology has gone away because no longer are we anticipating the seed. The seed has come, and so now we go to the far reaches of the globe. And so now who belongs to this? Well, it's really just believers. So there's that huge change. So it's seeing more discontinuity than continuity. So it's actually asking a little bit of a different question. The question that it's that view, the generic Baptist view, will ask the question, since there's discontinuity, our lens for reading the Bible will see discontinuity over continuity. They'll say, okay, show me where in the New Testament it says to baptize babies. And you want to mark this down. A Reformed Presbyterian pastor is going to say this. The Bible doesn't say baptize babies. I'm going to get hate mail now.
From everyone.
From everyone. Everyone will hate me now. But it doesn't. It doesn't say that. And that's fair. And, there are implications, household baptisms that do take place. And some of the implications of that are there's probably children in there. And if, they have some sort of Jewish background, that's what they, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the argument, well, that's an argument from silence. Well, yeah, but it's also an argument from silence to say that it doesn't say it. So the bigger question isn't where in the New Testament does it say to baptize babies? The question from specifically a Reformed Paedo-Baptist view is where does it say not to? Because if we're striving to see continuity, that is, that in this one covenant of grace, the people of God are both believers and the children of believers, both in the Old Testament and the New, or at least in the Old Testament, and we want to see continuity between the two testaments because it's the one covenant of grace, our bigger question should be, where in the Bible does it say not to give the covenant sign to the children of covenant members? And I think there's good warrant to say that actually a lot of implications say that, well, it does say that. So, that said, one of the arguments that people will come back, though, swiftly thereafter is to say, well, circumcision and baptism are not the same. Well, and you would, in some sense, be kind of right. They're not the same, because circumcision is circumcision and baptism is not that. Those are two different things. But Paul, in fact, will actually link the two together, where he'll talk about the old and then the newness of what has come and link those two things together, both in a Christocentric view. So hear this. This is in Colossians chapter 2, verses 11 through 12. It says this, "In him, that is Christ, You were circumcised with a circumcision not performed by hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. Now, there are all kinds of arguments, and our Baptist friends have so many different things going on there that they're probably arguing. But hear me for just a minute. We're talking about the covenant sign and seal for being a part of the covenant community. Very clearly in the Old Testament, that's circumcision. And very clearly in the New, that's baptism. So with that being true, how then you see or don't see those connections is really more of a hermeneutical question. How is it that you're reading the Bible? The Reformed are just saying, this is how we view the continuity of Bible, rooted and centered in the person and work of Jesus. So if you don't agree with that, that's A-okay. We understand. But that's the Reformed Paedo-Baptist view.
Great.
Okay.
We did it.
We did it. Wow. Okay. Well, so now then, let's quickly jump into a couple other things. One, Nobody talks about this aspect, but regardless if you're Credo-Baptist or Paedo-Baptist, here's something that is true that people don't tease out enough. There is both a blessing and a curse with baptism. Baptism and kind of a biblical theology of baptism always has with it a lot. It actually has a mark of judgment, interestingly enough. The theme of water and throughout the Bible, which is a part of baptism, has the theme of judgment from the Lord in it regularly. Take, for instance, 1 Corinthians 10. Paul says this, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud as they passed through the sea." Okay, there you go. "And they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." The splitting of the sea. So, baptized into Moses is, that's covenantal language of the Lord's work through his prophet, and it's through his redemptive work, the proclamation of his word, Moses, prophet, and in reality, splitting the sea, this redemptive reality of bringing his people through judgment, right through judgment, providing a way for them so that they pass not, generally unscathed, but completely. Dry ground is that sort of language of his complete and utter deliverance of his people. He brings them through that, but the waters themselves are pictures of judgment. Everybody's baptized in the sea. They either are Israel, and they've been provided a way being split through the sea, but the Egyptians are baptized too. It's just a baptism of judgment. And it looks a lot more like immersion. But that language of, okay, I'm sorry. Too far, my bad. That was a joke. It was a joke. I didn't mean it like that. It was a joke. Or another picture, 1 Peter 3, a classic work that a lot of people love, sometimes gets, slapped pretty hard. But here it is, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20. "To those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water." That language of through water is the water was not the water was the picture of judgment. They were saved from the water, is another way that you could translate that Greek preposition dia, through water, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you. Also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but a pledge of clear conscience to God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So hear this. This is good. This is real good. With covenant signs, there are both pictures and elements of judgment and blessing. In baptism, there is judgment. Baptism is a blessing for you and not a judgment, because Jesus took all of the judgment on your behalf. He is the ark. He is the one who received you rightly deserve to be Egypt, who is baptized by the water instead of through the means of God's redemptive plan. And so, this picture of judgment with the sacraments is to say, this judgment has been poured out on Christ, not on you. You, in fact, the judgment's been poured out on Jesus. You receive all of his righteousness. You are clothed in it. And therefore, now what do you have? You have blessing and glorious realities of that. Now, I would also be remiss if I didn't put this in here too. The nature of baptism as a passive sacrament. So, very briefly, one, just understanding the use of the term, baptism always has with it a passive implication. Yes, there are imperative forms, or that kind of thing. Matthew 28, the Great Commission, go baptize. Okay, that is active, but he's telling them to do the baptizing. The person who's being baptized, though, that language of being baptized is passive. The New Testament doesn't have sort of this idea of you don't even baptizing yourself. That's still, there's a passive implication with that. But what really happens in baptism, you are baptized. You don't put the mark on yourself, exegetically speaking, especially in accordance with the way that the New Testament uses it, which again goes back to how the Reformed, specifically the Paedo-Baptist view of this kind of passive nature. What is the Lord doing? He's working, yes, believers and the children of believers who are called holy. See 1 Corinthians 7 and the book of Malachi chapter 2. The children of believers are deemed holy. And so what do? They receive the sign. So regardless if you're a believer or the child, the infant of a believer, either way, baptism is always a passive sign. You're not putting that on you. There's nothing about that where you put the sign. That's the Lord putting his sign and his seal upon his people. So there's this passive nature. So now then, with that being said, this is what trips a lot of people up about baptism is, what is baptism? What is being sealed to them? Well, even in our own Reformed definition, it's our engrafting into Christ of regeneration, of remission of sins. We hear that and we go, okay, so you're saying that infants can be baptized, but when you baptize them, they're not regenerate, and they're, because they're not united to Christ in, a salvific way. They're united to his body, this covenant community. They haven't been. So what's the point? Well, here's a little argument, a little pushback. Even for Credo Baptists, at least generally speaking, especially generic Baptists that I know, you're not regenerated whenever you're baptized there either. And you're not united to Christ there either. And your sins are not washed away in that moment there either, even in the generic Baptist tradition. So, one, y'all don't really believe that aspect of it either, that the water in that moment is suddenly doing a thing. So now we're at a question of the efficacy of baptism. And this is why this passive view, the view that we are receiving baptism is being put on us, is so pertinent, and why it's also okay for the children of believers, we believe. Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 28, verse 6 says this: the efficacy of baptism, it working out that thing of union with Christ, of regeneration, of the remission of sins, all of those things. The efficacy, what is being sealed to it, is not tied to the moment of time wherein it's administered. Yet notwithstanding, by the right use of this ordinance, the grace promised is not only offered, but really exhibited and conferred by the Holy Ghost to such, whether of age or infants, as that grace belongeth unto, according to the counsel of God's own will, in which is his appointed time. Here's what that's saying. Baptism, right, in and of itself is not the thing that is uniting you to Christ, engrafting you into him, regenerating you, etc., etc., etc. We're not saying when we baptize an infant that suddenly they've been engrafted into Christ in a salvific way, or that they're regenerate, or that their sins have been removed, or anything like that. What we are saying is that they do belong to God. They are to be viewed as part of the covenant community. And God, in his righteous and holy and all-wise time, will bring to bear the promises conferred in that, in accordance with his divine counsel and will. Which, again, even our generic Baptist friends hold to some sort of view like that. It's not that moment. The Spirit does that whenever the Spirit does at the wise counsel of God. And same is true for our infants. So, all that to say, here's what baptism is doing and why we do what we do. We believe that it's a covenant sign and seal, that it marks out those as belonging to Christ and those belonging to the people of Christ with all the gifts and blessings and benefits therein. And that is what baptism is all about in our view. Okay. All right. Very nice.
All right. We did it.
We did it.
We did it. Hopefully we didn't upset anybody too
Hopefully not too much. And again, so sorry if you feel misrepresented. It was not intentional, I promise.
If you did, you can email us for feedback.
That's right.
Or questions, if you've got them, to keaton.paul@pcazion.org, or you can leave a comment on this episode, and hopefully we'll do some sort of like Q&A at some point. And we'll see you next week. We'll dig more into sacraments in the New Testament.
Tremendous.